Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining ADL's Western Division for our first storytelling webinar in our new series, My Story, Our Story. My name's Elaine Foyer-Barton, and I'm the board chair for ADL San Diego. I'm honored to introduce our storytellers and panelists today. First, we will hear from Jo Ivester and her son, Jeremy. Jo recently published her second book, Once a Girl, Always a Boy, which explores what it was like for her son to grow up in a world not quite ready for people like him. When I first met Jo several years ago, she had just finished her first book and was talking about her son, their experiences, and her intent to share them. I'm delighted that today she is here to share her wonderful book with all of us. Next, we will be joined by three organizations for a panel discussion and Q&A. Tiana Vargas is the Family Program Coordinator from the San Diego LGBT Community Center. Jen LaBarbera is the Education and Advocacy Manager from San Diego Pride, and Venice Baccarella is a board member from GLSEN San Diego. They are all here to share a little about their work in San Diego. Please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to you in a follow-up email. I invite you to put any questions you have in the chat box, and we will try to answer as many as possible during our Q&A. Many people contributed to bringing this program to you today. I would like to thank all our partner organizations across the Western states that helped to make this webinar possible. And finally, storytelling is an excellent way for us to glimpse the experiences of others whose lives are different from our own. Stories give us insight, compassion, and a clearer view of the world which we all share. Jo and Jeremy, thank you for being with us today. And I'd like to turn it over to Jeremy to start. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, hi everyone. My name's Jeremy, and I am transgender, meaning my gender does not align with my sex assigned at birth. So in my case, I was assigned female at birth and have since transitioned both medically and socially to male. I'm here along with my mom, Jo, to share some of my story. But first I want to talk about why we do this. And what it really comes down to is we want to spread awareness. And I think it's so important for a couple of reasons. One, for those going through something similar, having people to look to know that what you're feeling is totally valid and that you've got a future and a community, it's vital. People need that kind of support. And raising awareness is also important to combat those who would use trans lives as a way to spread fear and hatred, because it's very easy to dehumanize and hate what you don't understand. So I hope that by sharing my story, I can show just how human I am, and that we're just people and therefore deserving of love and respect. So I'm going to turn it over to my mom to start with the actual storytelling part. Go ahead.
So, hello everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to ADL and to all of our organizers. It means a lot to Jeremy and me and really our whole family. The opportunity to share our story is an opportunity to raise awareness, and we have to believe that with that increased awareness, we will have increased acceptance. Jeremy and I have been working together for a while now. It's important, I think, to know that he gave his permission right from the beginning. Before I ever started writing my book, I asked Jeremy if it was okay. And I promised him that if at any point he made the decision that it was no longer comfortable, that I would stop. And he's a very private person. He doesn't seek the limelight. He doesn't particularly enjoy it, though he is very good at speaking. So he had to give up his privacy in order to make this happen. And that took a lot of courage. Of course, I already knew how brave he is by the journey he has taken. Telling the world that you're transgender is not an easy thing. Deciding to live as your true self is not an easy thing, and no one takes it lightly. So Jeremy, I am so proud of you and thrilled to be here with you today. Often when we're working together, Jeremy will say, well, for the storytelling, I'm going to start by turning it over to my mom because it goes all the way back to time before I can remember, to when he was a preschooler. So today, the way it's going to work, we're going to do a little bit of sharing directly from our new book, and we're going to tell stories in and around that, and then we'll have a panel that will basically have a discussion about this with a whole group of advocates. So I'm going to start with one story that goes back to when Jeremy was a preschooler, and he had his hair down to about here, and we took him in to get a haircut. And the stylist was, shall I say, not as experienced as we might have liked, delightful person, but not doing a great job with the haircut. And I could tell looking at Jeremy that he wasn't happy with it. He was pulling on his hair, trying to make it longer on one side because the stylist had gotten it off. So I'm going to share with you the story from the book. And I will say, though, as I'm reading, I'm not reading exactly what's in the book. For those of you that have it and want to follow along, it's on page 15. But in the book, after a lot of decision-making, discussions, seeking guidance, I decided to use Jeremy's birth name and female pronouns until the point in his life where he said to the world, I'm Jeremy, please use male pronouns. Tough decision because in retrospect, Jeremy was always Jeremy, but I wanted the reader to come along on that journey with us. And so thus the decision. But in this setting today, when we're just kind of zooming in literally for a little bit of a visit about the book, it would feel extremely awkward to me to say Jeremy's birth name and to use female pronouns. So I'm not going to do it. I'm just changing it as I read. So Jeremy's looking in the mirror and not happy. And I said, don't worry, sweetie, I'll fix it when we get home. Jeremy trusted me. He stopped squirming in his seat, smiled at the hairdresser, and settled in to wait. The moment he was done, he jumped up and ran to the car, saying, Mommy, it's okay. You'll make it better. I didn't know until an hour later just how prophetic his words had been. The moment we got home, we headed straight for the bathroom. I dragged my desk chair in from my study and placed it facing the mirror. Jeremy climbed up, eager to see how I was going to change his bedraggled appearance. Have you ever done this before? He asked. Sure, I answered, with more confidence than I felt. I used to trim Ben's hair all the time. What are you going to do? How do you know where to cut? Will I look like Ben when you're done? His questions tumbled out faster than I could answer, so I just went to work. I had to trim the hair really short before I could get it to look right. I don't know whether it was my inexperience with the scissors or the growing grin on Jeremy's face, but for some reason, I kept on cutting. And the more I cut, the more Jeremy beamed. By the time I was done, he looked exactly like Big Brother Ben had 3 years earlier when he was 5 years old. Jeremy had a traditional boy's haircut, parted at the side and clipped neatly around the ears, long enough to need a comb, but not so long as to require brushing. I didn't have the words to explain why Jeremy was ecstatic, but for the first time since becoming aware of how he looked, I could tell that he liked what he saw. Despite not understanding completely, I shared his joy. It didn't matter to me that his pleasure in looking like a boy was unusual. All I cared about as a mother was that somehow, in some way, I'd made my child happy. I'd made my child happy. That's really what every parent wants. We didn't know what it meant to be transgender. What we knew was that we had a child that we thought of as a girl at the time, but he played with the toys and games that our society thinks of as male, and he preferred dressing and having his hair short, looking like what we think of as a boy. And we were okay with that. And all of his friends were little boys, and they were okay with it. And before they hit puberty, no one cared what was under Jeremy's clothes. He was just one of the guys. And it changed though as they got a little older. When he was in around 4th or 5th grade, he got rejected from a sleepover. Not by the kids, but by a mom who said to me, "It's not okay for Emily to sleep overnight with the boys anymore." And that was the beginning of Jeremy's isolation. And now he's going to pick up the story.
So that leads pretty well into middle school, which is for me when things really changed. Middle school was a hard time, unsurprisingly. It is for a lot of people. But physically, puberty was not fun for me. I have distinct memories of 6th grade PE having a coach approach me and say, "Hey, you can't wear t-shirts without a sports bra anymore." And just feeling absolutely crushed with no real explanation as to why. And in hindsight, I think that even though 6th grade me knew I was a girl, I had never put it together that that meant I would grow to be a woman. And so once I was faced with my body's changing, it really felt like a betrayal. So physically, middle school was not fun for me. But unfortunately, it was also very socially isolating because I really lost my friend group, because once we got to middle school, suddenly all the little boys didn't know how to interact with me. It was no longer okay that I was a tomboy, which is going to bring me to a reading from the book that's during a football game in, I guess, 7th grade this would have been, but I'll go ahead and jump in on that. Sorry, I think there are dogs howling in the background. Anyways. When we're on the field and suited up, my teammates forget that I'm a girl. With my shoulder pads and helmet, I don't look any different from them, and we're all caught up in the sport. But I feel left out because we're no longer friends off the field. I thought 6th grade was tough, but 7th grade is even worse when it comes to not fitting in. One day, as we were hanging out before practice, waiting for coaches to show up, I walked up to a group of guys who were laughing together. When I got there, though, they all went quiet. Whatever they were talking about, they didn't want to discuss it in front of me. Maybe it was girls or their junk, but it made me really uncomfortable. So I climbed into the stands to sit alone, thinking, it's okay that they don't want me around. I can deal. But I couldn't. I couldn't make the feeling go away. My throat hurt and my chest tightened, and I felt isolated and deserted as I thought about how long it'd been since I'd hung out with my teammates, like when we were little kids. I no longer had a social life.
So Jeremy didn't have a social life, and I didn't even know when it happened, because our society didn't know what it meant to be transgender. And when I say our society, I mean my bubble of the world didn't know. And so we were lost. We couldn't provide the kind of support that I wish we had been able to do. So we all stumbled through. And Jeremy was doing research online, trying to figure things out, and in pretty strong denial. He was very, very good at denying who he is. And it kind of came to a head for him, though, when his big sister asked him if he would be her maid of honor. And Jeremy was delighted and said yes. And he did what he felt sisters were supposed to do for each other, because none of us were recognizing that he wasn't a sister, he was a brother. But as it got closer, Jeremy was thinking more and more about top surgery, had come very close to making a decision, and was having real difficulty picturing himself as maid of honor, wearing the maid of honor dress. And this next story, which will be the last of our readings, Jeremy is talking about how he felt as he's dealing with the building pressure of the wedding day.
I dreaded its arrival for months. When the box came, I'd left it unopened, not wanting to deal with what it contained. I tried to push it out of my mind, tried to ignore how it made my stomach clench with anxiety. I didn't even want to think about the dress inside, let alone look at it. Why had I said yes when my big sister Liz asked me to be her maid of honor? I'd known right away that it felt wrong, but the thought of disappointing Liz kept me awake at night, a rock in the pit of my stomach. Picturing myself wearing the bridesmaid's dress was even worse. Finally, 6 weeks before the wedding, I used a kitchen knife to cut the seal on the box and opened it, determined to look at what lay inside. Inhaling deeply and gritting my teeth, I slowly reached for the blue chiffon gown. I pulled it from its packaging and spread it on my bed. All I had to do was try it on. I could do that, I told myself, wincing at the thought. I should do that, but not yet. I'd wait until I got home from school. All day, with every word of every lecture, my mind drifted back to my bedroom, to the dress waiting for me. Arriving home after class, I walked slowly into my bedroom, my pulse racing. I stripped down and slipped the dress over my head. On somebody else, I would have thought it beautiful, no question, but not on me. I cringed at the thought of wearing it in front of everybody. I cringed because that flowing dress was so totally and completely inappropriate for me. A prison uniform instead of a beautiful gown. It was the exact opposite of what I like, of who I am. I'm not feminine, and I don't want to look that way. My throat tightened as I felt my eyes tear up in frustration. Deciding to face my anxiety head on, I stood in front of my mirror and looked at the person staring back. I shuddered at my reflection, at the tightly fitting bodice that pushed up and magnified my breasts, accentuating every curve. I hunched my shoulders forward, trying to make my shape less noticeable, but it didn't work. My reflection smiled back at me, but it was a sad smile. Leaving the safety of my room, I walked over to where my roommate was sitting at his usual spot in our living room. I raised my arms and spun around, allowing him to take it all in. Seeing the devastation on my face, he finally spoke. "You have to tell her. You're tearing yourself apart." He was right. I couldn't think of anything else. I hate my body. I have ever since puberty, when there was no avoiding that my body was turning into a woman. I'm not supposed to have curves on my hips and breasts. I'm supposed to be flat. I know that. I just have no idea what to say to my big sister.
I still get choked up when I hear Jeremy reading those words and living through it. I could see how pained he was. He'd already shared with his dad and me that he was thinking about surgery, but he hadn't shared with his siblings yet. And so I couldn't say anything to them about we need to do something different, because it was Jeremy's truth to tell, not mine. He wasn't ready to share, but the end of the story is that he was ready to tell his big sister he couldn't wear the dress. And they came up with this wonderful compromise, which was that Jeremy wore the same slacks, the same color slacks as all the groomsmen, and a white dress shirt and a vest that was the same color as the bridesmaids, all of the bridesmaids' dresses. And then he stood with his big sister when she got married. Well, within the next 3 months, things changed, and Jeremy was able to share more with the family. He got his surgery scheduled, and he told his big brother, Ben, what was going on. Well, Ben the one he'd emulated and wanted to look like when he got that haircut back at 4 years old. Ben, although he still didn't know that Jeremy was transgender, just that he couldn't wear the dress, Ben and his fiance at the time said, how about this? You wear a tuxedo just like all the guys and stand by Ben's side. So Jeremy was still listed in the program as one of the bridesmaids, but he got to look the way he felt comfortable. And looking at them at the wedding, I could just feel how content he was. And I was so grateful to my oldest son for his understanding when he didn't even know what he was understanding. So another year went by, and Jeremy was wrestling more and more with who he is, and he finally came to the self-realization with a lot of help from a wonderful therapist. And he said, you know what, I am transgender. And he went public on Facebook. He said, hey guys, you may have noticed my name's changed. Please start calling me Jeremy. Please use male pronouns. And by the way, I'm going to start taking hormones, which means my voice is going to lower. I might get some facial hair, and my general physique will turn more masculine. That's it. Bye-bye. And with that, he announced it to the world. And once he did that, that freed me up to share as well. I'd been kind of bursting with pride for him, and I couldn't tell anybody in my life what was going on. And now he had opened the doors, and I did my own Facebook posting. And in that, I said, Jeremy, you are so brave, and you have shown such courage. And I'm proud to announce to the world that now I have 3 sons, acknowledging that Jeremy was joining his 2 brothers. And I added that we'd been with him every step of the way and would continue to be by his side wherever his journey took him. Well, I didn't expect it, but it went kind of mini viral. And I started getting Facebook messages from people I didn't know, from friends of friends of friends. And they were saying, this is wonderful seeing an accepting mom. And I kind of felt like I'm, getting a pat on the back for being supportive and understanding, especially hearing from gay and lesbian young adults who, in some cases, were just saying, this means so much to those of us who are gay and lesbian to see an accepting mom. Felt great. And then the letters took on a lot of a darker tone, as I started hearing from young transgender men who identified with Jeremy. Men who, when they were 15, 16 years old, had figured out who they are and come out to their families and been kicked out. Young men who, because of that rejection, had lived on the street, had couch surfed amongst their friends when they could. They dropped out of school. They left their smaller towns or rural areas, and it was heartbreaking. Nobody should be kicked out of their home because of who they are or who they love. And as I saw these responses, I felt that I had to do something. So I started doing some research to find out, well, what was it like for our transgender community? And I found that they are among the most discriminated against and they're marginalized. And it's bad enough that the attempted suicide rate among transgender teenagers is over 40%. That's not just thinking about it, that's teenagers who have actually tried to take their lives. And I looked at what I was learning, and I looked at the notes I'd gotten from people, and I looked at Jeremy's life, and I decided I had to do something. And it was at that point, very early on, that I said, I've got to become an advocate. And I did. And that was what was behind my deciding to write a book. I'd already, as Elaine had said, I already had my first book out, and it tied in with social justice when it comes to interracial relations. And again, a memoir using my own family story. And I realized how powerful literature is for raising awareness. So I went into writing my new book with saying, this will be a tool for not just Jeremy and me as advocates, but for our whole family and for our whole community. And I asked Jeremy if he would do it with me. And after I'd asked for his permission, and he said, sure, if I don't have to write. So I knew he didn't like to write the way I did, but he'd recorded his story on his computer, partly to just help himself figure out his ideas and partly to share with his dad and me. And so I had those recordings, and that's what became his voice in my book. And since that time, our whole family has met such an amazing group of advocates like the ones that you're going to meet in a couple of minutes. A community of people that are absolutely devoted to caring for our transgender community. Some of them are members of the transgender community. And it's just it's been this wonderful, uplifting experience to be a part of something so important. And I often get asked, well, what can we do? So thinking about, we've got, maybe 150, 200 of you listening today. And what can you do? And I'm guessing many of you are already advocates, and that's why you're listening. But for those of you who are not and are trying to figure out how to contribute, there are some very concrete things you can do. First is get out and vote. We need people representing us in the political world that understand the difficulties faced by the transgender community. The Barack Obama presidential administration understood that. And we were making major strides in solidifying laws and directives so that our transgender school children were taken care of, our transgender military were respected. And that's changed. We've gone backwards and we need to change it again and go forward. So vote. There are organizations that you'll be hearing about later today that are doing great work. Find the ones in your area. Give them money if you can. Donate your time, your expertise. Support the staff. Just an email or a phone call that says thank you, you're doing something important. That support is really, really helpful. And then you can lobby. In addition to voting, you can go to your politicians and demand that they do the right thing, that they pass the Equality Act at the federal level or at the state level. Wherever you are, you can make a difference. And finally, on a very personal note, if someone says something that's derogatory or makes a joke or says that being transgender is weird in some way, don't just listen silently. Speak out, say something. You have tremendous power when you do that. Say, wait a minute, that's not okay. I know the mom of a transgender man. I know Jeremy. I know a transgender man. And he is deserving of all of the respect and dignity that we all are. And when you say that, you become an advocate. And in the last minute before we open it up to all of our panelists to hear more about them, I'm going to ask Jeremy to just say a couple of closing comments.
So I think the biggest takeaway from our book is how much of a difference it makes when a transgender person has support from their friends and families, and what a game changer that is. Because my transition, while it was difficult and had its road bumps, it was ultimately full of joy and was all about me learning about myself and becoming my true self, and that was very powerful. So again, I hope to raise awareness because it's important that people know that we are here and we are real and we're just people and we deserve basic human rights.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was awesome. You're seeing a mom's pride coming through. I am just so amazed constantly by Jeremy. I'm going to ask all the panelists to turn on your video and unmute yourselves. And I think we have Elaine kind of taking over as introducing everybody now, or are we just going to one by one tell us about your organizations? I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank as to what we had agreed to.
I think we're just going one by one. So
There we go, Jen.
yes. Hi, everyone, and thank you all so much. And also, just to be clear, Jeremy, yes, trans people are just people, and also trans people are magical. And so, like, let's be real about that. Just a quick introduction of myself and my organization specifically. So my name is Jen. My pronouns are she and they, or they and she, depending on the day, which one I want more. And I'm the Education and Advocacy Manager at San Diego Pride. And our mission is to foster pride, equality, and respect for all lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer communities locally, nationally, and globally. So we're a bit different than other Pride organizations. So in addition to the annual Pride Parade and Festival, which is taking a whole new form this year because pandemic, we do also offer a really wide range of year-round programs, many of which are under my umbrella of education and advocacy programs. Those range from voter engagement and issue advocacy to women and trans-focused events and coalitions, to leadership development and trainings and coalition building. We do a lot. And so basically anything that's not direct services, those are mostly covered by the center, who you'll hear from in a second. If it's not direct services and it's not gay, San Diego Pride probably does, and it is gay, San Diego Pride probably doesn't. And one of the most robust and my personal favorite program areas falls under the category of our youth-led programs, which includes programs for youth in the arts, building youth, social and educational spaces, and our annual Youth Leadership Academy. We also work really closely with a lot of other organizations around San Diego, like ADL and like both of the other organizations represented by our other two panelists. So over to you, T.
Hey everyone, my name's Tiana Vargas. My pronouns are they, them. I am a queer, non-binary, transgender person. I got my degree specializing in gender, race, and sexuality. So I take that with my lived experiences and apply it to my work at the San Diego LGBT Center. So I coordinate the families program. We have a really broad understanding of what family means and really invite anyone you have chosen as family. Our program is designed to provide resources, education, support, and opportunities for community building for LGBTQ families and those considering parenthood. I often work with youth and families who are experiencing anti-LGBTQ victimization, homelessness, food insecurity, and unemployment. So the families program, we offer specialized support groups, workshops, play groups for children, food bank deliveries, hotel vouchers, case management, you name it, we will do it. Navigating family acceptance is really a core part of this program. So I get calls from parents who ask, hey, my kid came out as this, what do I do? How do I support them? How can I become better? So I work alongside families to provide education and emotional support. So I help families complicate their ideas about gender, sexuality, and really even parenting. So I coordinate a series of support group spaces for parents and guardians to process their emotional responses so that their kids don't have to take on that burden. We try to create a loving community that holds each other accountable. We share our skills and strategies for navigating challenging conversations and relationships. And really, we all deserve these elements of care because we need each other, especially when we're navigating change like coming out or transition. So thank you all for being here, and I'm gonna pass it over to Venice.
Hi everyone, my name is Venice Baccarilla. I'm with GLSEN San Diego. I'm a board member and have been for about a year now. And before then, I was a youth. And I currently go to SDSU and I am majoring in LGBTQ plus studies. And so a little bit about GLSEN. GLSEN is a nonprofit dedicated to making schools safer and more inclusive for LGBTQ plus youth. And GLSEN's work is very essential, impactful, and it's like a necessity. Like personally, just in the past year, I've helped train hundreds to thousands of educators and youth serving professionals and just different folks, and really educating them on all the laws and all the like policies that they need to accommodate for these youth, because there's so many statistics that you can find of how much students, LGBTQ plus students, and like how much struggles and like how much like harassment and bullying that they go through. And like when students' names and pronouns are not respected, and like their queer identity basically gets erased. And so what GLSEN tries to do is just tries to make it more of an inclusive place for them. And throughout the year, we organize different events for youth, such as Day of Silence, the GSA Awards, and ice skating. And they're all just great events. And personally, like the ice skating one was just really fun this year, because you just get to see all these queer youth forget about the heaviness that they have to go through in the world, and they're just so happy, and they're just like meeting all these other different LGBTQ plus youth, and they're just having a blast. And even though like we live in San Diego and it's 2020, there's so much more work that needs to be done, especially with like the school districts. And San Diego is just such a huge county, and there's just a lot more work to be done, but I'm just glad that I get to be a part of that. And it's like just being a queer trans man myself, just being able to apply my own experiences and like really educate like what I go through, what other folks go through, and just how much more there is to do. But thank you for having me.
That's awesome. I'm just so proud of all of you for the work that you're doing. This is great to hear the detail. Jen, I think you've been collecting questions. Is that?
I have, yeah. Yeah, so y'all have contributed some great questions, a ton of great questions that our friends at ADL are compiling and putting into what's a really long Google Doc for me, questions to choose from. And I did see a quick question in the chat of what does GLSEN stand for? And I'm also a board member of GLSEN San Diego. We have our little tentacles basically everywhere in San Diego. And it's an acronym that kind of isn't really so much used anymore. So it used to stand for, and Venice, correct me if I'm wrong, the Gay and Lesbian and Straight Education Network. Is that what did the S stand for?
I'm not sure. I forgot as well, but now it's just like its own name.
Yeah. So it like gained so much of that brand recognition that they're like, well, we do more than just gay and lesbian people now. Like we care about far more than that, but we're going to keep this acronym and just be more inclusive and broad ranging in everything that we do. So my first question that I want to pose to really Jeremy, Venice, and Tiana, you can all answer this, but just like, how did you choose your name? Like, what was it? Was there something about that name specifically that made it just feel right? Or, right, like, 'cause that's always a process of trying on different names and finding which one fits. And so what was your process with that?
I can go first. So it's actually a funny story. My birth name is actually Venice. So I didn't ended up changing it. I just thought, I've never personally met any other person named Venice. And I thought like at the time I was like, oh, it's pretty like co-ed and like it can, anyone can use it. So I just ended up keeping my name. I got kind of lucky.
I'll go next. My mom picked my name. Yeah, it was important to me that my name be one that fit with my siblings, and that would have been a name that she could have named me when I was a baby. And it was actually when I was under for top surgery, my mom had gone out and bought a baby name book and was looking through it. And that's one of the things that we talked about in that week of recovery where we were in a hotel room together. So yeah, my mom picked my name.
So I did not change my name. There was a lot of pressure to change my name. I think, there's a really particular narrative about trans people that it's, you go from step A to B to C, and this is the way it goes. So there was a lot of external pressure for me to change my name. A lot of people also decided that normally don't call me T, decided to shorten my name, thinking that that was something affirming for me. And just a lot of, don't you want your life to be easier? If you keep your name, people are gonna know. And so I did kind of consider it for a while, but my gut really told me that wasn't the right thing to do. I really love my name. It's the first gift that my mother gave to me. She chose it for me when she was 12 years old. And I just love it. So I decided to keep it. And I think again, I bring up that, there's a dominant trans narrative that we have about folks. And so this is a great chance to kind of break some of that down. And so, yeah, I have happily kept my name.
Yeah, I love that. And I was actually introduced to you as T, so it took me a while to even realize that your name was longer, which is why I kind of default to that still as well and kind of go back and forth. But yeah, right, like there is this wide variety of trans narratives, and the story that Jo and Jeremy are able to tell is amazing. It's a great story, and it's one of so many, right? Like we all have so many stories that we can tell, and the trans community is just as diverse as the rest of the human community as well, right? Which means that the gender identities and journeys and ways that folks find their way to where they are probably also is, just as varied as humans are. So and gosh, it's hard to pick which of these questions to go to next, but I will go with, and this one's, and really can be, that can be for all of us, but we'll go with, we'll start with Jo and Jeremy. Did y'all have any issues with extended family or other members of your immediate family taking some time to get there or not understanding at all? And if so, how did you deal with that?
Well, I'll jump in since I'm the one who, beyond the immediate family, just started sharing. And one of the things that I had been saying to Jeremy before he publicly made a statement was that your family will accept you. And my extended family is big. There are several hundred cousins and aunts and uncles. We've kind of all kept track of each other with 1, 2, 3, 4 generations alive. And so it's a lot of people. And I was able to say extremely confidently that everyone would be okay, that the acceptance within our family would be complete. I trusted that much. And that trust was well placed. As far as I know, and Jeremy, you might contradict this, but I don't think there's been a single negative response. And it's been the opposite with cousins and aunts and uncles sending Facebook messages to Jeremy, just saying how happy everybody is for him and that this is just incredible, and they're excited. And then I start hearing stories from other family members who are somewhere on the LGBTQ spectrum that maybe never would have talked with me before, but because Jeremy was willing to be open and put his true self out there, it opened up the entire family, which is an incredible gift.
Jeremy, does that track for you? Do you remember anyone else that?
It tracks.
Yeah.
I know I was never worried about being rejected. I was worried about disappointing people and having people change their perception of me. But I was never worried that anyone would stop loving me because I was very confident in my family's love.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's so important and also kind of rare. And Tiana, maybe it's getting less rare and maybe you're seeing more people be accepting. I think there's, it's trending a little bit more accepting, but I think it's so rare and so special to have a family that's really that supportive.
Yeah, we do still get a pretty regular amount of youth who have been kicked out of their homes for coming out. So unfortunately, it is definitely not everybody's on board. And I think there also are various levels. Like, I don't think it's always like, you know, we either really reject the idea or we're really accept it. Like sometimes there's a lot of, it's really messy. Family acceptance is a really, really messy journey. And at least, you know, I do get a good amount of families that reach out and are down to do the work for it. And I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah. All right.
I want to add just the
go ahead.
importance, to add the importance of those who have gone before. So I have a gay brother and a gay sister, and they've been out since their 20s, so long before Jeremy was born. And their courage, their willingness to be out there is part of why I knew that the family would be accepting. So just kind of a signal of respect and thank you to our older LGBTQ community who came out at a time when it was even more difficult than it is today. And T, I just hate hearing that. I know we have still many unaccepting families, and I'm so glad that the work that you're doing, that you're providing that support. It's fantastic.
Yes, I echo that for sure. Yeah, the things that the Families at the Center and Tiana specifically do are pretty amazing and pretty unique too. And that's going to kind of segue into the next question. So it's kind of a combo. I'm going to kind of Frankenstein a few different questions together. But so if family acceptance is not the case, because it's not always the case, and Tiana, you also mentioned that burden of trans individuals explaining their experience to their families. What are the suggested steps, right? Do you suggest that parents reach out to organizations rather than asking their children? Do you suggest, like, who do you suggest reaching out to? What resources are there for parents who want to accept their kids, or for kids who are dealing with unaccepting parents or beyond, or other extended family members?
Yeah, the really specific burden I was talking about are really like loud emotional responses that really are just inappropriate for the child to be facilitating or for your kid to be facilitating. I think that your kid or whatever family member is coming out should lead the process. You should absolutely get to know who they are and how they're navigating things, making sure they have the care and the resources and the creative freedom they need as they're developing their identity. However, there is some deciphering that parents and adults need to do. What can you Google? What can you, if this is about how do I parent through this, you shouldn't be talking to your kid about that, right? You need to be talking to other parents who are navigating something similarly, right? It's a great way to also, okay, how am I going to talk to all of this extended family? So step one, you want to talk to your kid and figure out, does your kid want to be outed to, this family member, that family member? How do they want you to have those conversations? Do they want you to correct all the family members' pronouns in the moment? Or do they want you to talk to family members individually in another room when your kid's not around, right? So like, you need to have that first conversation with your kid to talk about boundaries, right? Which this also actually inherently challenges a lot of things around parenting, because parenting in the US is a lot about like controlling your children and not respecting them as like autonomous individuals. So this is really challenging for a lot of parents, but you really do want to encourage conversations around boundaries and what's going to make your kid feel the most safe and the most encouraged to be out. And then if you need more advising on, okay, how am I going to talk to my mom about this? Maybe you can talk to your partner, or maybe you should reach out to us. I have a bunch of support groups with all kinds of parents who have been having these difficult conversations that you can kind of troubleshoot with. So I don't think it's all one way or another. I think parents and family members just need to really be strategic about where they're allocating that type of labor, So we want the kids to lead the process, tell us who they are, tell us what they need, tell us what their boundaries are, and we want to respect and lead with that. And then for our questions that we can Google them. For the things that might be really hurtful for your kid to hear about how you're having a hard time, go do that with another parent. Go do that with another adult, because that can be really harmful for your kids. So I'm not sure what else other folks have to share about that.
Well, I want to hear from Jen and Venice on that, but I wanted to add that and Jeremy, I wanted to add that I often have parents approaching me as a public parent of a 30-year-old transgender man and saying, well, what do I do? And I don't accept. And the advice that Tian gave, fantastic. And that's very, very much in alignment with what I try to get across to people. But I hear from parents that just say, I'm grieving for a lost child, or I can't accept this. And I have some go-to concepts that I try to get across. And one is, this is still your kid. This is the same person that they were before this whole self-discovery, self-identification journey came underway. And you loved your kid before, it's the same person. They still have all of these same fears and desires and are just as lovable. And that's hard for some people to hear because they don't believe it and they have to. The other thing I'll sometimes go to, and I try not to because it's painful, but to say, look, the evidence shows that a supportive family is really critically important in the health and well-being of your kid. And that kids who are not supported are more likely to self-harm. And they're more likely to be contemplating taking their lives. And that doesn't mean that being accepting is going to fix all the problems, because it's not. There are accepting parents their kids still are having tremendous trouble in coping and dealing. So I don't want to make it seem like this is a magical solution for everybody, but on average, we can reduce the children's anxieties and depression and eating disorders and cutting and any other self-destructive activity by accepting. And I have known people who found out that their child was transgender through a note that they got to read when their child was in the hospital after a suicide attempt. And no parent wants to find that out that way. You love your kid. And so I will turn to those statistics and those hard facts if I find a parent is still resisting. And it may not break through at the moment, but it at least gets them thinking.
Yeah.
I don't want to be closing on a
No, it's all right. We're not quite closing yet.
I'm really passionate about getting parents to accept. It's so important.
It is. It is vital. Venice, do you want to add a little something?
So just to make like a long story short, when I came out, my dad wasn't accepting of me being trans or queer at all, and my mom was kind of codependent towards that. But as I aged, I still like progressed and like kept using my voice, like, this is me, these are my pronouns. And when you don't use the pronouns that I want, it feels like you're just stabbing me in the back every time. And eventually my mom began to start talking with some of my friends' parents as well, and she ended up directing my mom towards the LGBT Center in San Diego. This was around like when I was in 5th grade. And we ended up going to one of those meetings, and it really just kicked off, leading my family towards being accepted. And after going to those meetings and them talking with other parents and then, understanding, my dad, like after a while just became accountable and was like, you know what, you're right. I just kept trying to fix something that was not broken. And it was just really amazing for him to be able to just 180 and is now becoming one of my biggest supporters. And I also have a younger sibling. Their name is Romeo, and they recently came out as non-binary. So now we are working with my dad to start using, their pronouns, and that this is a valid identity. And there's so many other folks in the world that identify, and that like just having to work through this process with him again and just reassuring him like this is not a phase, this is real, and these are like real feelings on the line. But without the LGBT Center in San Diego, I have no idea where I would be now,
Yeah, and there are those support networks and resources in all kinds of places. And, you know, yes, like San Diego is a large enough city. And we have a lot of different organizations. And wherever you are, there are also people and resources that are available to you as well. And there are other parents who are available to you, even just through the internet. And so, and we're all getting really used to just doing everything through the internet these days anyway. And so we do only have 2 minutes left, which is rough, because it's, we could be talking about this for hours still. I feel like I want to ask so many more questions and I want to hear so much more. And all of y'all that had really good questions and who submitted them, we'll try to get to your questions in like an email form, but we'll also be putting the emails in the chat afterwards. There was a question that I wish that we had time to get to, but I'm going to just give a like 1 minute thing about it. The question was, how do you help people connect the experience of the trans community with the current conversation around Black Lives Matter? And how can we understand Pride Month in that context? And so, which is this hand, this is why I included this as my background on Zoom today. When we say Black Lives Matter, we mean all Black Lives Matter, and all lives will not matter until Black Lives Matter. And Black Lives Mattering means that Black trans lives matter. Just already so far in 2019, we've lost 20 trans folks to violent means. So especially trans Black women are at heightened risk of violence and death, and that's not okay. And so unless and until we are saying that Black trans lives matter, all Black lives will not matter. And unless all Black lives matter, all lives will not matter. So that's going to be my last plug and last little statement before I hand it off to Scott. Yeah, thank you all so much. You all have been incredible. And I'm going to hand it over to Scott, and I believe we are all going to turn off our cameras and mics.
Thank you, Jen. I want to thank everybody and send my appreciation to all of our panelists for such a touching and informative session. As I think about what we have just heard, I am reminded that the journey we take as humans is so vastly similar, but also so distinctly different. It is only through stories the likes of Jo and Jeremy's that society, community, and people come to appreciate and identify with one another. One of my favorite sayings is that we only love the things about which we care, and we only care about the things that we know. Through our shared experiences, we embrace our differences, find our likenesses, and find care and love for one another. Jeremy and Jo, I want to thank you for entrusting us with your stories. This webinar hits a special chord with me. I have been involved with the ADL since 2009, and my initial draw was very simple. I was a gay man, enraged by the passage of Proposition 8 banning same-sex marriage, and I wanted to find my voice. And I have done so. I believe that ADL not only provided me that voice, but it gave me the resources and the platform to speak out against injustice and to rally people from all walks of life, to use their voices to speak out against hate, to raise awareness, and to be ambassadors for a better community. I truly believe that our work is as important as ever. We've heard just today, LGBTQ rights remain under attack across the country, and the lives of trans women, particularly in the Black community, are senselessly being lost to bigotry, hatred, and intolerance. It is for this reason that I am particularly proud of ADL's partnerships with a diverse coalition of partners and its work in the field of LGBTQ rights. The work of GLSEN, the Center, and San Diego Pride, and the vast array of other LGBTQ organizations is essential, and they need all of our support. I appreciate Jen, Venice, and Tiana for sharing these organizations and their personal stories with us, with them, and along with other ADL coalition partners from the African American, Asian American, Latino, and LGBTQ communities. We can come together for our collective success. As we've navigated as a society through the last 2 months in the aftermath of the tragic death of George Floyd, as well as too many others, I have been reminded time and time again for the importance of listening to our partners and for the need of ADL to stand side by side with our fellow citizens in the universal quest for safety, equality, and inclusion. And part of that safety, equality, and inclusion is care and love. So I want to thank you all for participating today. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for your commitment to diversity and your investments in our community at large. Have a great afternoon.